So when something gets massively bungled, one of the best things you can do is figure out how to make sure it doesn't happen the same way again, right? It's kind of a life lesson thing. So as we look back on Chuck Schumer's decision to quickly cave to a Republican funding deal, I think there are quite a few lessons to take away, and most importantly, focus on what happens next. First of all, there's a reason Nancy Pelosi reacted to the whole episode like this.
It is about what comes next. I myself don't give away anything for nothing. And I think that's what happened the other day.
Don't give away something for nothing is a pretty good guide for the strategy moving forward. I mean, we're all going to move forward here, but that's a pretty good guide. And when she said, as she said, it's really about what comes next. The question now, though, is how Democrats can avoid caving to Republican demands in the future, like massive cuts to Medicaid and SNAP benefits, while somehow leaving Republicans without any apparent political scrape on them at all from that. So to me, there are two big lessons from that recent funding fight. And the first one is this. Democratic leadership seemed to be assuming that Speaker Mike Johnson would fail. I mean, according to a number of Democrats I've spoken with over the last week, there was an assumption that the right flank of the Republican caucus might once again refuse to vote for the funding bill. I mean, that's what happened last September. That would have given the Democrats leverage to negotiate, but that didn't happen. Problem is, there didn't seem to be, at least not clear to all of us, a plan for that not happening. So, lesson one, don't assume Republican failure will save the day. I mean, this is the MAGA party. The MAGA leader is literally sitting in the White House. And now, even the usual Republican fringy holdouts seem to be willing to do whatever he says. The other assumption that was wrong was that staying quiet, pretty quiet, and keeping everything mostly behind the scenes was going to result in a better outcome. First of all, Schumer didn't even seem to keep the Democratic leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, fully in the loop. Never mind his own caucus in the Senate. They could have held meetings with Democratic leadership in both chambers weeks in advance. They could have done that with the whole caucus. They could have developed a public strategy to back the Republicans in Congress into a tougher corner. But they didn't do that either. They could have pushed much harder for a totally clean bill, publicly. One that didn't include any of the poisonous cuts that were in the final package. Doesn't mean they would have gotten that, but they would have helped win the public argument. They could have shouted that from the rooftops. And that would have allowed Democrats to at least put the blame on Republicans for the cuts that did end up in a final bill. And would have given Democrats in office, or even those running for office, or even those attending all these town halls, more to use as rallying cries at these town halls and events. Republicans are trying to cut your Medicaid. We just want to keep the government open. Try that on for size. Not so bad. But instead, it all kind of felt like a surprise to most people, and including in the Democratic caucus. And now lots of Democrats across the country are understandably pissed off. I was just talking to Congressman Kazar about this, because they didn't see a plan to fight back. So in the end, Speaker Marietta Pelosi is right. No surprise. Schumer really did give up something for nothing. And Schumer seems to think that that's just inevitable, or that's what he seems to be saying when you're the minority party in Congress.
Do you acknowledge that Democrats didn't get anything in this fight, Leader Schumer?
Well, what we got at the end of the day is avoiding the horror of a shutdown. There was no leverage point that we could have asked for things. They just would have said no, and because they controlled, let's not forget, they control the House and Senate, they could force a vote, yes or no, on the CR without any additions.
Now, it's true, as Schumer said, the minority party, which is where the Democrats are in both the House and Senate, they don't have a lot of legislative leverage at all. But they need to create some leverage, different kinds of leverage. They may not have the majority, but they have the power of building public support. I mean, 80,000 people have shown up to meetings held by Bernie Sanders and AOC over the last couple of days. There is public support. Lay out the strategy. Lay out what Republicans are trying to do and how it would impact people. And there are opportunities coming up to do just that. We can all move forward. I mean, later this spring, Republicans are probably going to try and extend tax cuts for high-income individuals and corporations. And there will be another funding fight when this all expires in September, in the fall. And Democrats will need to take those lessons into those fights, or they're going to get run over. And I don't just mean in Congress, I mean publicly. Look, I know there's been a lot of focus on whether the Democratic leader thinks the country is in a constitutional crisis or not. It's an important question. Chuck Schumer started the week by saying we weren't, ended it by saying that we were. That's progress. But frankly, what matters more than how he labels it is what he's going to do about it and what he's going to do next time. We'll be right back. In June of 2023, Chuck Schumer sat down with New York Times reporters Annie Carney and Luke Broadwater for their new book. Here's my hope, Schumer told them. After this election, when the Republican Party expels the turd of Donald Trump, it will go back to being the old Republican Party. Well, obviously neither of those things happened. And ever since Trump got back into office, this Republican Party has given up all sorts of congressional powers to serve him. They ignored the requirement for Trump to tell Congress about firing government watchdogs. They literally voted to give up their own power to serve as a check on Trump's tariffs. And they've all but ceded their constitutional spending power to Trump and Elon Musk. And as for Chuck Schumer, to this day, he's still clinging to the hope that Republicans will come around somehow.
I think if we fight, as I said, we can make Donald Trump the quickest lame duck in recent history. His Republican colleagues will want to abandon him and will do very, very well in the 2026 election.
Guys, I don't know who needs to hear this. And Democrats may do very, very well in the 2026 election. But the old Republican Party is gone. It isn't coming back. Everyone needs to know that. Joining us now are Annie Carney and Luke Broadwater. They're both correspondents for the New York Times and authors of the brand new book coming out Tuesday. I have a galley copy here. I feel so special. Madhouse, How Donald Trump, MAGA Mean Girls, a former used car salesman, a Florida Nepo baby, and a man with rats in his walls broke Congress. If that title doesn't want people to make people want to go out and order this book, I don't know what will. It's so topical right now because I think a lot of people are trying to understand, like, how the hell did we get here? And what is the Republican Party coming back? And what is happening in a branch of government? You guys cover it every day. You wrote an entire book about it where there's chapters about individual members people need to understand. But I just want to start with Chuck Schumer because I think he's just such an interesting character in this too. I mean, that quote was from nearly 2 years ago for your book, that's in your book. You've seen his recent interviews. Do you think Democrats don't realize the Republican Party isn't going back to the normal Republican Party?
I think there's a split. And this is really we interviewed Schumer a few times for the book, and he always came back to this idea that if the Republican Party can just expel Trump, it will revert. When the Senate last year failed to pass the border security package that included funding for Ukraine, he told me afterwards, about 10 senators are truly anti-Ukraine, but the other 20, once Trump isn't pulling in that direction, they would vote yes for this. But there's no evidence to back that up. Like, the new senators coming in are like J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley. And so Schumer is really I don't know if it's just he wants that to be true, but other senators talked to us for the book, like Chris Murphy, who even back then in 2023 was saying, you know, I understand Chuck's argument. I don't agree with it. There's something like rotten in the core of this party. And our book is looking at these House Republicans, really, who have taken, really the first MAGA Congress, who have taken Trumpism and made it all their own. So, like, if you kind of want to understand how we got where we are today, for 4 years when Trump was out of power, these characters in Congress acted as his sword and shield, kept MAGA alive, and have made it their own brand and taken it to new heights, like even maybe beyond where he goes. So I don't know what evidence there is to back up that there's anyone who wants to. And we saw in this Congress all of the quote unquote old Republicans fleeing, not even finishing their terms, fleeing for the exits. So there's really not a lot of facts to back up the idea that it's coming back.
There are so many examples. As I mentioned, just like chapters have focuses on different members, which kind of tells the story of some people's evolution. I mean, Ken Buck, who's was a very conservative member of Congress, and then retired early. You talk about him in here. You talk about the evolution of Nancy Mason here. Why did you use those examples? Let me ask you, Luke. I think I know why, but I think they're particularly good ones to tell people about the party.
Telling examples. Ken Buck was one of the founders of the House Freedom Caucus, right? The farthest right caucus in the House. He has an AR-15 or had an AR-15 mounted.
Probably still does.
On his office wall. This is a very conservative man. But he actually was too out of step with MAGA to survive in the current environment, right? He ends up getting forced out of Congress, essentially, because he won't go along with the lies about January 6th. The other person at issue, Nancy Mace, there are several chapters dedicated to her evolution. And she goes from being a Trump skeptic, sort of maybe a moderate voice in the House, to full-blown MAGA. And what's incredible about this, and she talked mostly to Annie for the book, was she sort of narrates her political evolution. She says out loud, I have no future if I stay anti-Trump in the Republican Party.
Right. We know where Nancy Mace is now, and we know that she's someone who likes attention. But we really were talking to her throughout as she talked out loud, I'm in a complicated space. How do I move up and be anti-Trump? You know, the reality is no one is doing that because it might be actually impossible. So she chose the easy route, which was to just flip completely and become full MAGA. We talked to her in the summer of when Trump was not yet locked up the nomination. And she said, if Trump is the nominee, I will pull myself down from the airwaves. I will just disappear. Well, that hasn't happened.